Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So Wuthering Waves has been out now for only 1 day, and it seems like within that span of time, the public opinion on the game has shifted and done a complete 180 from being very positive to being very negative, to such an extent that even I'm surprised because while I was playing through the game for the first 2 or 3 hours, even though I realized that there was a lot of jank, a lot of stuff that I didn't like, and just a lot of unpolishedness going on with the game. This game definitely feels like it was rushed out before it was ready for launch. I still enjoyed the game to the extent that I could run around the world and kill stuff and enjoy the combat. I definitely think the combat offered something that was unique and substantially different enough from Genshin Impact to stand on its own. But I didn't really realize that the opinions would be so negative, and now we're reaching the point where people are actually comparing the game unfavorably to Genshin Impact, which is not something you really don't want when your main competitor is Genshin Impact. Even though I've said before that this game is not really, it's not really, I don't think it's right to say that it's not competing with Genshin Impact. It's more like it's not threatening Genshin Impact. So why is this? Well, my personal opinion on the state of Wuthering Waves, even before it was released, was that it needed to be better at everything compared to Genshin Impact to actually make like some sort of dent in the current gaming industry when it comes to gacha games. And this was predicated on the idea that because Genshin Impact is already such a it has already such a large installment when it comes to the player base, and it's so like entrenched in the gacha gaming industry right now that to release a game that is essentially 90% the same as Genshin, and then there is like 10% left, which is like the end game content as well as the combat. That's not enough. You have to be better than Genshin Impact at multiple things to remain in the gacha game industry. Now, does that mean the game is going to be a failure? Is it going to not make its money back? Is it going to be a net loss? It's probably not. It's probably going to make all its money back and then some. But that doesn't mean it's going to be relevant in the long term. It's probably going to end up like Tower Fantasy, judging by how things are going right now. Um, Public sentiment has crashed so low that people are now comparing Wuthering Waves unfavorably to Genshin Impact, both on the Chinese forums as well as on Twitter and on Reddit. People are saying that, Genshin Impact, we really had it really good with Genshin. We really had it good. We didn't know how good we have it with the minimal amount of bugs, the relative polish that the game had. Really, it's not even relative amount of polish. Genshin Impact is just a very polished game. And this is really the focal point of what everybody is complaining about. Yes, there are complaints about the story. Yes, there are complaints about like the camera and the lack of polish. But really, the problem is that the game is just not optimized. People are saying that on high-end phones, the latest iPhone, they still can't play the game at 30 FPS, which is terrible. And the mobile player base is the vast majority of the gacha game player base. So if the mobile players are not able to properly play the game, then really what are you doing making a gacha game, right? Are you just going to cater to the PC gaming crowd? Because that's not going to make as much money as the mobile player base. And even on PC, people are complaining that there is a lot of stutter, that they're having FPS drops, and it doesn't really seem to have anything to do with the graphical settings right now. People who are playing on the lowest settings are still having very low frame rates in the 10s to 20s. And I myself have had problems with stutter. It's just that I didn't really complain about it on my previous video because I didn't think it was worth mentioning. I also have stutter on Genshin Impact. But now thinking about it a bit more, I do think that it is worse on Wuthering Waves because Wuthering Waves is much more reaction-based combat system. It's not like Genshin Impact where you can just press a bunch of buttons and then you go into 5 seconds of invincibility frames. So the enemy can't just hit you for like 2 seconds at a time. Whereas Wuthering Waves, you pretty much have to time your button presses so that when the circle goes into the circle, you press the button and then you can counterattack them. And then when they're attacking you, you can dodge properly. You need to time that. The button prompts, they're not as tight as say, let's say Sekiro. You're not going to need that amount of like preciseness to get the right counters, but it is still a counter-based system. So if you're getting frame rate drop when you're trying to do like actual hard endgame content, I think that could be a very big deal breaker for a lot of people who are looking forward to this reaction-based combat system. It's not going to work properly if you're just battling the system itself all the time when you can't even play the game. So that's why people are comparing it unfavorably to Genshin Impact right now. And people are going over to Genshin's live stream channel on the Chinese forums to basically apologize and say how good they had it with Genshin Impact. This is, again, also happening on Twitter, so it's not like it's just the Chinese player base. People are just saying, wow, Genshin Impact really did a lot right. And in my opinion, some of this is warranted, but Again, I was surprised by how negative the sentiment is, and I want to talk about why this is and why it's getting harder and harder to make gacha games in the current market. And the biggest reason is that Hoyoverse is really just releasing too much content for new games to keep up. What I mean by this is that if you look at the calendar for the next 2 to 3 months of gacha games, what do you notice? Well, the game industry for gacha games when it comes to Hoyoverse games is almost completely full. We have 4.7 for Genshin Impact coming up in less than 2 weeks. That is going to be the first new endgame content for Genshin Impact in 4 years. So I've heard a lot of people say that, well, it's not going to be that good. It's not going to be the greatest thing of all time. But that is not what is important. The important thing is that Genshin Impact is getting new content. And by virtue of just getting any kind of new content when it comes to endgame, that is already more than most Genshin players want. Like, let's be honest, our expectations for Genshin Impact are not very high. Just having endgame content already puts it above what most people were expecting in the first place. So that is going to be pretty hype. And after that, for 2.3, we're getting the end of the Penacony storyline. So that's going to be pretty cool. It's also going to have an overhaul for the end game for Honkai Star Rail. So both of Hoyoverse's major games are getting end game content updates in the next two patches in the next 4 weeks. So when that happens, people who are going to be wanting to play Wuthering Waves is going to drop off. The amount of attention that is going to be put into Wuthering Waves is going to not be nearly as high as it is right now. And then what comes after 2.3 for Honkai Star? Well, 2 weeks after that, Zenless Zone Zero is coming out. It's going to be also a very combat heavy game. So again, if you're interested in Wuthering Waves for the combat, and Wuthering Waves is still not functioning very well, then that's just another reason for you to stop playing Wuthering Waves. And then 2 weeks after that, we have another Genshin Impact patch, and that's going to be 4.8. That's going to be the end of the Fontaine series of patches. And 4.8 is always pretty hyped. The zero point 0.8 series of patches have always been very big summer event patches. The last event had a lot of criticism for being too simple, but this time we're going to, hopefully get something different from that. I've heard that we're going to go back to the islands again, but that's just rumors right now. But essentially what I'm getting at is that the next 4 to 6 weeks of content for the high end, not really the high end, it's really just Hoyoverse games, but the Hoyoverse games are essentially the high end of the gacha game market that Wuthering Waves is targeting right now. And the entire schedule for the next 2 months is completely full. We've got new endgame for Genshin, we've got new endgame for Honkai Star Rail, the end of the Penacony storyline, a new game for Hoyoverse, and then a new summer event for Genshin Impact. And after that, we're getting the new region for Genshin Impact Natlan. So the zone of success, the period of possible success for new gacha games is getting increasingly low. And all of these games, if you've noticed, are completely different from each other. Genshin Impact is not the same as Honkai Star Rail, is not the same as Zenless Zone Zero. So Honkai Star Rail, Genshin, Zenless, all of these games are targeting different player bases with different interests. Some of them want more hardcore content, some of them want turn-based content, some of them want open world content. All of these games are so different that they're covering a wide genre of games. And because of that, it's going to be harder to innovate in the gacha game industry space right now. You're going to have to do something different, and you're either going to have to do something so different from Hoyoverse games to offer something that people will want to play, or you're going to have to offer something that is just better than Hoyoverse games. Now, the problem with that is innovating is hard. You have to being the first in anything is hard, so that's going to be less likely to happen. And being better than Hoyoverse games is also very hard. And as Wuthering Waves has shown, the reason why this is hard is because Hoyoverse is already a pretty old company. Not many people know this, but Genshin Impact was not Hoyoverse's first game. They were making games like 4 years before that with Honkai Impact Third, and before that they had Honkai Gakuen, I believe. So they've been at the gaming industry for nearly 10 years. It's been at least 8 years since they've started making video games. They have entrenched industry knowledge. They have a set of expertise in their talent pool that is very hard to match. And one of the reasons why this Wuthering Waves is not running as well, according to some Twitter posts and Reddit posts, is that the game is running on Unreal Engine 4, and Unreal Engine 4 is not as optimized for low-end devices as the engine that Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail and all the Hoyoverse games are running, as well as the previous Kuro Games game. It's Punishing Gray Raven. The previous game prior to Wuthering Waves was also made on Unity, and the reason why they chose Unreal Engine 4 apparently is because it's much easier to make an open world game on Unreal Engine 4 than it is to make it on Unity, because there are more things that you have to do manually on Unity compared to UE4. And the reason why Hoyoverse is able to do this is because, well, they just have more money, they have more time, they have more manpower, they have more resources, whereas Kuro Games comparatively does not have that. So that is the theory for why they are using Unreal Engine 4. And because they are using UE4, the game just does not run as well. Apparently, UE4 is optimized for high-end devices such as consoles, as well as high-end gaming PCs. So the fact that people are not able to run as well on the phone is a financially driven decision rather than something that is just bad optimization. It is something that is apparently just intrinsic to Unreal Engine 4, and it's not going to be very easily fixed. And so we're already seeing the differences in game quality between someone who, like MiHoYo, a company like MiHoYo that has a whole like a bajillion dollars that they can spend making several different games, whereas Kuro Games, from what I have heard, was running low on money even before the game released. And judging by how unfinished the game feels on release, they definitely pushed up the release stage so that they wouldn't have to compete with both Genshin Impact and Zenless and Honkai Star Rail. And the reason why they're doing this is because the time period in which they can achieve success has become much, much lower, as well as for all the other future gacha games. It's not just Wuthering Waves. Wuthering Waves is not going to be a one-off. There are definitely going to be future gacha games that are trying to mimic Genshin Impact that will also fail in terms of making waves across the gacha game industry because the barrier to entry has just become too high. It's like not only has Genshin Impact achieved success, it's like imagine if Blizzard didn't fuck up and they just kept on making good games. That is essentially what Hoyoverse is doing. They are just continually making high quality games or games that are of appreciable quality across different devices to such an extent and with such consistency that other companies are not going to be able to keep up. And because of that, I've become not like less hopeful for new competitors, but I am becoming increasingly jaded when it comes to not Genshin killers, but even anything that is going to be able to break it in the gacha market. And you can see that I wouldn't call Hoyoverse predatory, but it is feeling like they are trying to create a monopoly on the high-end gaming industry for gacha games. And Wuthering Waves, it's just not there. And I don't think it's going to be there. I have a hard time believing that it is going to improve enough for people to give a shit within the next couple of weeks, because by the time that Genshin Impact's new patch comes out, people will no longer care about Wuthering Waves. You can say that is still going to be a niche fan base, but it's not going to be nearly enough for people to give a shit. It's not like Tower Fantasy is not making any money anymore. From what I've heard, it's still making millions of dollars, but nobody really talks about it anymore because it's just not relevant to the hardcore gaming player base that talks about games online, that talks about gacha games. When you go to gacha gaming, the subreddit, nobody talks about Tower Fantasy anymore except to make fun of it. So even if it is a financial success, that doesn't mean it's going to be a media success. Essentially, it's not going to make the same waves as Genshin Impact. And saying that it's not trying to compete with Genshin is kind of copium. I framed it wrongly in the past. I was saying that it was not going to be a Genshin competitor, but it's not good enough to be a Genshin competitor. It's not that it was not trying to be a Genshin competitor. It's just that it's literally not good enough. I don't know how to feel about this. On one hand, it feels like I'm already doom posting Wuthering Waves, but I don't think this is just a Wuthering Waves thing. I think this is a Hoyoverse being too big to kind of like knock off its totem pole thing. I feel like there are a lot of content creators who have a vested interest in getting away from Hoyoverse. It feels like Hoyoverse is getting maybe a bit too high in its breeches. It feels like Hoyoverse is getting more comfortable just being a monopolist type of company. I don't know if the rumors about the contracts are true. I don't know if Hoyoverse is restricting content creators from playing games other than their own games. But the truth is that Hoyoverse does make better games than other gacha companies. This is not something that is contestable. For the amount of value that you get out of Hoyoverse games, it's not even comparable to other gacha games. It doesn't matter if those gacha games have better pull rates. It doesn't matter if they give you more pulls or they're more generous. The fact is that those games do not have the same production values. Trying to make a open world game that is comparable to Genshin Impact with the same quality is, I would say, almost impossible now without a backer like, a large backer like maybe EA or Microsoft. Actually, it would probably be better if Microsoft wasn't involved. All their companies seem to go to shit. But yeah, I feel really jaded about the possibility of a Genshin competitor or a Hoyoverse competitor. It's not just a Genshin competitor, but it's also a Hoyoverse competitor. There is nothing that is competing with Honkai Star Rail right now in terms of production quality. I feel like Honkai Star Rail has definitely transcended the idea of being just like another turn-based gacha game. I think it is the turn-based gacha game now. And I think Zenless Zone Zero will also be the instance-based combat gacha game when it releases. It is definitely going to be more polished. And that is what Hoyoverse is known for now. It is essentially the Apple of gacha games. And I'm all there for playing these games, but I also feel a bit sad about the lack of competition. This is why I wanted Wuthering Waves to succeed, not because, I necessarily love Wuthering Waves, but because I feel like it's not good to have just one company be everything when it comes to what you enjoy. You don't want one company to be your entire existence. You don't want to depend on one company for your entire livelihood, do you? So like hopefully something comes up, but I don't think that's Wuthering Waves. I think Wuthering Waves is already over, to be honest. So this is Bench Gamer signing out. I hope you guys enjoyed yourself. Press a like or something. I'll see you guys sometimes later. Bye.